The story starts by showing a man named Choi Kung-soo riding his motorcycle at night. While he's waiting at a red light, a male food delivery courier warns Kung-soo not to extend his hands while riding because it could be dangerous. Unfortunately, a car suddenly crashes into the courier, sending him flying through the air. The person responsible for the accident gets angry and threatens Kung-soo not to interfere with his business, or he'll face harm. Despite the threat, Kung-soo remains unshaken and calls an ambulance for the injured courier. He then pursues the hit-and-run driver. Eventually, Kung-soo manages to stop the driver and quickly takes a photo of the car's license plate and the driver's face. The perpetrator, unwilling to accept this, starts chasing Kung-soo in his car. However, at a road intersection, a truck suddenly passes by, causing the driver to panic and veer off the road. His car appears to go out of control as it heads downhill and eventually crashes into a building. As the perpetrator tries to get away, Kung-soo steps in and mentions a legal article that could lead to his arrest. After that, Kung-soo contacts the authorities to report the culprit. Soon, the police arrive and apprehend the suspect. With his mission accomplished, Kung-soo leaves the scene, casually riding his motorcycle. However, as he passes through an intersection, another motorcycle approaches, almost causing a collision. Kung-soo realizes that his phone is damaged from the fall and asks the rider named Donna to fix it. Donna immediately declines, claiming that the phone fell on its own from Kung-soo's body. Kung-soo, not satisfied with this explanation, continues to insist and asks for compensation, which angers Donna and leads her to kick him. Later, Donna, wanting to avoid further trouble, says that if Kung-soo feels treated unfairly, he can take legal action. She then resumes riding her motorcycle and leaves the scene. On the other side, there's a woman named Ji-yoon who is running away from a group of men dressed in black suits. Meanwhile, in another location, there's a handsome man named Jin-kyu driving his fancy car. When he reaches a narrow street, his car gets blocked by a big truck. Jin-kyu, who's resourceful, kicks the side mirror to make some space. Suddenly, he slams on the brakes as he spots Ji-yoon crossing in front of his car. Startled, Ji-yoon apologizes to Jin-kyu and quickly climbs over his car to escape from the men in black suits who are still chasing her. Jin-kyu, annoyed to see his car stepped on, gets frustrated, and his irritation grows when the men in black suits follow her actions. Meanwhile, Kung-soo goes to a noodle restaurant to apply for a job as a food delivery courier. There he meets Mr. Jung, the chef and restaurant owner, to express his interest. Kung-soo mentions that he'll only work for 2 months, which doesn't bother Mr. Jung since most of his employees don't last long. Shortly after, a beautiful woman named Sun-nae suddenly enters and asks Mr. Jung not to hire him. Anxious, Kung-soo tries to convince Sun-nae to accept him. After seeing his sincere efforts, Sun-nae decides to accept him. However, she mentions that she's not the one who will make the final decision. Kung-soo must first get approval from Donna. Not long after, the interview begins and Donna asks why Kung-soo has been a delivery courier for so long. Kung-soo replies that he simply enjoys his job. Hearing this, Donna declares that Kung-soo has passed, leaving him pleasantly surprised. Meanwhile, in one of Seoul's alleys, there was a lively restaurant. A businesswoman named Mrs. Hae-run received a report from her assistant about the restaurant's successful 30-year history and its popularity among customers. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Hae-run instructed her secretary to speed up the purchase of the shopping complex so they could compete with the other merchants there. At the same time, Kung-soo, who was now officially working as a food delivery courier, headed to a repair shop to deliver an order. There he was surprised to see Jin-kyu's impressive racing car. Kung-soo asked about the car's price, but Jin-kyu replied that the price wasn't important because Kung-soo couldn't afford it. This upset Kung-soo, and he asked Jin-kyu not to underestimate others, even if they were deliverymen. This led to an argument between them until a garage attendant stepped in and stopped them. That evening, Ji-yoon, who had managed to escape from the men in black suits, sat in front of a building with a growling stomach. When she spotted some leftover food in a trash can, she picked it up and started eating. Kung-soo, who was nearby, felt sorry for her and kindly invited Ji-yoon to join him for a proper meal. They headed to a restaurant and Kung-soo prepared a meal for Ji-yoon. She eagerly accepted, and her joy brought a smile to Kung-soo's face. After Ji-yoon finished her meal, Kung-soo brought up the topic of her running away from home, knowing she had left because of her parents' controlling behavior and lack of money. He could tell from her willingness to eat discarded food. Kung-soo asked Ji-yoon why she had run away from home, and she explained that she couldn't tolerate her parents' strictness anymore, so she had chosen to rebel by leaving. After hearing her story, Kung-soo took Ji-yoon to an upstairs room and told her to rest. The following day, Kung-soo was surprised to discover that Ji-yoon had left her room, leaving a note to thank him. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Kung-soo informed Donna that they were out of bowls, despite him visiting 7 houses where they claimed to have placed the bowls. Upon hearing this, Donna instructed Kung-soo to locate the missing bowls at all costs, or he would be terminated dishonorably. Kung-soo then returned to the complex where he delivered food. There he unexpectedly came across another delivery group, the Bangsu food group, and their friends who were gathered together. They all shared hearty laughter because they had successfully played a prank on Kung-soo by taking his bowls. Realizing that Kung-soo had caught them in the act, they immediately fled the scene, leaving Kung-soo infuriated. He chased after one of them, and after catching him, asked the person to introduce him to their boss, Bat Kong-ki. Upon arriving there, Kung-soo promptly requested Kong-ki to return his bowls. However, Kong-ki remained silent and unresponsive. This angered Kung-soo, and he attempted to attack Kong-ki. Witnessing this, the highly skilled Kong-ki easily defeated Kung-soo. However, Kung-soo, refusing to give up, got back up and confronted Kong-ki again. Irritated, Kong-ki pushed Kung-soo to the edge of the rooftop. Trapped, Kung-soo continued to demand that Kong-ki return the bowls, threatening to pull Kong-ki down with him if he didn't comply. Hearing this, the fearful Kong-ki finally agreed to return the bowls. After successfully recovering the bowls, Kung-soo left the scene. When he returned to the restaurant, he informed Donna that he had found the missing bowls. Hearing this, Donna was delighted and praised Kung-soo for his efforts. Meanwhile, Mr. Jung was surprised when he saw Kung-soo's bruised face. Kung-soo tried to cover it up by saying he was okay. Shortly after, Grandma Chong unexpectedly arrived with lunch for everyone. It turned out that Grandma Chong was the owner of the restaurant, which Mrs. Hae-run hoped to convince to leave the business. Despite the restaurant's popularity, Grandma Chong complained that she didn't have enough money after paying rent and employee salaries. On the other hand, Ji-yoon's father found a note from Ji-yoon containing an apology. Ji-yoon assured her father not to worry because she was stronger than he thought. Meanwhile, Kung-soo, who was about to rest in his room, was surprised to find Ji-yoon in his room with her belongings. Ji-yoon explained that she had just gotten a job as a waitress at a cafe. However, since she hadn't received her first paycheck yet, Ji-yoon asked Kung-soo for permission to stay temporarily in his room. Initially reluctant, Kung-soo rejected her request and asked Ji-yoon to leave immediately. Ji-yoon felt very sad and quickly packed her things. However, feeling guilty, Kung-soo eventually agreed under the condition that Ji-yoon would leave the restaurant at 7 o'clock in the morning and could return before 11 o'clock at night. The next day, Ji-yoon started working as a waitress at a cafe. Her manager advised her to be friendly and avoid arguing with customers, as it could cost her job. However, shortly after the manager left, a customer entered to order coffee, and it turned out to be Jin-kyu. He immediately recognized Ji-yoon as the person who had stepped on his car earlier. Ji-yoon continued to deny it, claiming that she had just met Jin-kyu for the first time. On the other hand, Mrs. Hae-run turns out to be Ji-yoon's mother. She was having a meeting with Jin-kyu's mother at her home. Mrs. Hae-run had intentionally invited Jin-kyu's mother to discuss the arranged marriage of their children, Jin-kyu and Ji-yoon. Later that night, Kung-soo asked Yoon-soo why he had decided to leave his mother to work in Seoul. Yoon-soo explained that he had never gotten along with his mother because he was annoyed by her constant nagging. Hearing this, Kung-soo advised Yoon-soo to always be grateful for having a mother who raised him, as many people out there did not have one. Kung-soo then encouraged Yoon-soo to visit his mother and apologize to her. Feeling remorseful, Yoon-soo finally agreed to meet his mother. However, as he was about to leave, Yoon-soo got involved in an accident. A taxi driver who witnessed it rushed Yoon-soo to the hospital. During their journey, their car was unexpectedly stopped by the authorities due to road construction. Unbeknownst to them, an illegal street race was taking place on that road, forcing the taxi driver to take a longer route. On the other hand, Jin-kyu was seen taking part in an illegal street race on a road he considered his own racetrack. During the race, Jin-kyu managed to secure the first place. The following day, footage of this illegal race involving Jin-kyu leaked to a television broadcasting station. This made his father furious, and he instructed his secretary to remove the video. After successfully blocking it, his father called Jin-kyu and summoned him to his office. There, his father immediately attacked Jin-kyu with a golf club. With an angry expression, his father warned Jin-kyu never to come before him again and even expressed a wish for Jin-kyu to pass away soon. Meanwhile, Kung-soo received news of Yoon-soo's accident and rushed to the hospital in a panic. Meanwhile, Yoon-soo remained unconscious with his mother and grandmother sat by his bedside, looking very sad. On the other hand, Jin-kyu found himself standing on the edge of a bridge, contemplating to do the unthinkable as his father had wished for. Meanwhile, Donna happened to be in the vicinity and rushed to Jin-kyu to stop him. However, Donna struggled and wasn't strong enough to pull Jin-kyu back, leading to both of them falling into the river. After a while, Donna managed to bring the unconscious Jin-kyu to the riverbank. There, she performed artificial respiration to revive him. Eventually, Jin-kyu regained consciousness. Donna wanted to understand why he had considered such a drastic step. Jin-kyu confessed that his father had instructed him to end his own life, and admitted that he was tired of his privileged life, even though it was all about having fun. Hearing Jin-kyu's confession, Donna became extremely angry. She kicked Jin-kyu and expressed her wish for him to have a quick death, feeling that her efforts to save someone who had never experienced hardship in life were in vain. The following day, Donna suddenly fainted while she was delivering orders to customers. Concerned, she was rushed to the hospital for treatment. Jin-kyu, coincidentally at the hospital, saw Donna being carried by the medical staff and followed them to the emergency room. The doctor there informed them that Donna had a high fever, dehydration, and bruises on her body. To rule out any serious injuries, the doctor planned to perform an X-ray and a CT scan. When Donna regained consciousness after fainting, she was surprised to find Jin-kyu by her side. Jin-kyu explained that he had come to the hospital earlier for a sore throat and had seen Donna being brought in. Since Donna felt unable to work, she asked Jin-kyu for help to cover her shift temporarily. Jin-kyu agreed and went to the restaurant to take over her responsibilities. Kung-soo, who saw Jin-kyu arrive, was clearly unhappy, but Mr. Jung instructed Kung-soo to teach him. After they finished their duties, they both went out to make deliveries. Later, as they were washing dishes, Jin-kyu asked Kung-soo if delivery drivers often faced rude treatment. Kung-soo explained that it happened quite frequently and shared the incident when Jin-kyu had treated him poorly while delivering food to his workshop. Hearing this, Jin-kyu felt deeply guilty and finally apologized to Kung-soo. On the other hand, Ji-yoon was seen meeting her father, who was busy putting up posters about himself. Tearfully, Ji-yoon immediately hugged her father and apologized for running away from home. They sat together at a bus stop, and her father encouraged Ji-yoon to return home and start speaking kindly to her mother as a way to gain her freedom. Ji-yoon agreed and began packing her things. She introduced her father to Kung-soo, and her father expressed his gratitude to Kung-soo for taking care of Ji-yoon. Upon arriving home, Ji-yoon knelt in front of her mother and explained that she wanted to try living independently since she had found a job and wanted to experience her own life. Her mother, Mrs. Hae-run, agreed to Ji-yoon's request on the condition that she would go on a blind date with the man her mother had chosen. On the other hand, Jin-kyu's mother warned her son not to ruin his blind date this time, threatening to send him to the Philippines to oversee a restaurant's construction if he did. When the day of the blind date arrived, Jin-kyu and Ji-yoon were surprised to discover that they had been set up on a blind date, even though they had met and clashed before. Jin-kyu told Ji-yoon that he intended to go on the date as he had promised his mother not to mess it up this time. Meanwhile, Kung-soo and Sung-jae were investigating the road closure case due to ongoing construction. They received information from a taxi driver who had witnessed a group of luxury cars exiting the closed road. The driver had seen one of the car's drivers paying the construction workers who had blocked the road. This angered Kung-soo, and he was determined to find those responsible for blocking the road for their own benefit. The following day, Donna, now recovered, was moved to a VIP room, thanks to Jin-kyu's referral. Jin-kyu even covered Donna's hospital bills. During this time, Donna briefly left to clean an English language school. Kung-soo, noticing this, approached her and scolded her for working while she was still unwell. Donna explained that if she missed a day of work, she could lose her job. Feeling sorry for her, Kung-soo decided to help her by picking up a stack of books and delivering them to the classroom. He also assisted with cleaning the school. After they finished cleaning, they sat down for coffee and chatted. Donna mentioned that she worked early every day to attend English language classes for free. Kung-soo asked why she needed more education even though she had already graduated, but Donna said he would understand someday. The next day, Kong-ki and his team invited Kung-soo to dinner at their restaurant because Kong-ki considered Kung-soo as part of his crew. During the meal, Kung-soo shared information about the illegal street racing that had disrupted the taxi ride to the hospital when Yoon-soo was injured. Kong-ki was furious and committed to tracking down the culprits. They decided to put up banners asking for witnesses who could help identify the illegal racers. In the evening, all the couriers gathered to collaborate on gathering information about the illegal racers. Some posted details online, while others distributed flyers in the streets. Kung-soo and Kong-ki ordered banners to aid in their search for witnesses. On his way home, Kung-soo noticed a restaurant sign lit up and approached it. He found Grandma Chong preparing ingredients inside. She explained that her restaurant would reopen the next day because she couldn't afford the rising hospital bills. Grandma Chong also mentioned that they had moved Yoon-soo to the nearest hospital as he had not yet regained consciousness from his coma. Kung-soo then reassured her, expressing confidence that Yoon-soo would wake up soon. Shortly after, Kung-soo received a call from someone who claimed to have witnessed the illegal racer on the closed road. They met with the man who had made the call, and he offered to share his black box recording with Kung-soo. However, the black box had a minor issue, so Kung-soo needed to fix it in order to retrieve all the data. When Kung-soo returned to the restaurant, he was surprised to find Ji-yoon sleeping in his room. He tried to wake her up, and she complained about her new rental, expressing her intention to stay in Kung-soo's room. The next day, Ji-yoon was still asleep, so Kung-soo pulled her out of the room. Jin-kyu had come to the restaurant to work, and Ji-yoon took the opportunity to suggest to him that she and Kung-soo had spent the night together. However, Jin-kyu informed her that it was his last day of work, which made Ji-yoon angry, and she left. While working, Kung-soo received news that his black box file had been recovered. He rushed to the destination where he and Kong-ki watched a video of luxury cars exiting the closed road. Kung-soo recognized one of the cars as Jin-kyu's, which angered Kong-ki. Kong-ki suspected Jin-kyu as one of the culprits, given his skill in driving sports cars. However, Kung-soo decided to handle the situation himself. Upon arriving at the restaurant, Jin-kyu and Kung-soo had a conversation. During their talk, Kung-soo suddenly brought up the topic of the illegal racing that Jin-kyu had been part of. He even mentioned that one of his friends was in the hospital because of that illegal racing incident. Kung-soo decided to take Jin-kyu to the police station to hold him accountable. However, Jin-kyu offered to cover all the hospital expenses for Kung-soo's friend instead of going to the police station. This angered Kung-soo as Jin-kyu seemed to think that remorse could be solved with money. Nonetheless, Kung-soo proceeded to take Jin-kyu to the police station. At the police station, Kung-soo showed the black box video as evidence. Jin-kyu continued to deny any involvement in the illegal race. The police brought in a taxi driver who claimed to have seen the culprit paying construction workers that night. Unfortunately, it was too dark for the driver to clearly identify whether Jin-kyu was the culprit or not. After hearing the driver's explanation, Jin-kyu was allowed to leave. Outside, Kung-soo warned Jin-kyu that he would eventually catch him. Jin-kyu, underestimating Kung-soo, claimed that punishing wealthy people like him was difficult. Kung-soo confidently asked Jin-kyu to remember his words. The next day, Ji-yoon, who knew that Jin-kyu was the culprit, asked Kung-soo to ensure that Jin-kyu would be punished quickly. Kung-soo then took Ji-yoon to the Han riverbank to show her something important. When they arrived, Ji-yoon was shocked to see over 300 couriers who had gathered there with banners. They were all there to collect evidence and seek witnesses to help send Jin-kyu to prison for his involvement in the illegal street race. This action attracted the attention of many people, raising awareness about Kung-soo and his friends' efforts to gather information about the illegal race. That evening, while Kung-soo continued searching for witnesses, he came across a delivery person whose motorcycle wouldn't start. Kung-soo approached him and helped fix the motorcycle. Afterward, he asked if the delivery person had ever seen the illegal street racers on the streets at midnight. The courier said he hadn't seen them, but remembered delivering food to a young man who appeared to be watching a video of the illegal race recorded on his phone. Upon hearing this, Kung-soo went to the young man's house. Unfortunately, the man's mother informed him that her son had been missing for 3 days. On the other hand, Bang-soo, who was at an internet cafe with his 2 friends, was frustrated about never winning games. He decided to go to the restroom, and there he overheard some young people discussing a video they had recorded of the illegal street race. When they were about to leave, Byung-soo stopped them and asked to see the video. After getting the video, Byung-soo and his friends rushed to the police station to report it. The police, after seeing the video that included Jin-kyu, immediately decided to issue an arrest warrant for him. The next day, Donna, who was getting ready for work, received a phone call from the hospital asking her to pay her medical bill right away. She owed 5 million won for medical treatment and a VIP room because Jin-kyu, her guardian, hadn't paid the bill yet. When Jin-kyu arrived at the bank to sort out the payment, he was suddenly approached by 2 police officers who wanted to arrest him. Jin-kyu managed to escape and quickly got into his car to go to the hospital. Upon arriving there, Jin-kyu quickly pulled Donna out of the car because the police were chasing him at that moment. He explained that he was falsely accused and asked Donna to believe him. Just then, Kung-soo arrived and immediately attacked Jin-kyu. Donna intervened, kicking Kung-soo to prevent him from attacking Jin-kyu again. Both of them got into the car and fled. Donna asked Jin-kyu to explain why Kung-soo had acted that way, as she believed Kung-soo wouldn't attack him without reason. Under pressure, Jin-kyu eventually confessed that he had blocked the road for an illegal street race, causing Kung-soo's friend to be in a coma due to a delayed arrival at the hospital caused by the blocked road. After hearing the explanation, Donna decided to get out of the car and leave Jin-kyu. Jin-kyu tried to stop her and asked for her understanding. Then, Jin-kyu's older brother arrived, giving Jin-kyu hope that he would help. However, his brother had come only to ask Jin-kyu to surrender to the police because their father's company was at risk due to the growing public outrage. His brother ordered his subordinates to take Jin-kyu away. Jin-kyu shouted for help from Donna, who reluctantly fought Jin-kyu's father's subordinates to save him. As they tried to escape, Kung-soo and his friends blocked their path and directed Jin-kyu to enter an empty warehouse where Kung-soo was waiting. Jin-kyu, instead of giving up, attempted to run over Kung-soo, who was in front of him. Fortunately, Jin-kyu stopped his car just in time to avoid hitting Kung-soo. Following this incident, the police finally arrested Jin-kyu. The next day, Donna was in a rush to get to her tutoring session, realizing she was running late. However, when she arrived in class, she was pleasantly surprised to find her room clean and tidy, thanks to Kung-soo, who had cleaned it. A few days later, while they were working together, Donna and Kung-soo noticed a banner next to a restaurant announcing its opening the next day. Kung-soo was upset about the restaurant owner's unethical business tactics. Shortly after, Mrs. Hae-run, the restaurant owner, arrived with her new manager, who turned out to be Jin-kyu. Both Kung-soo and Donna were shocked to see Jin-kyu as the new manager. Jin-kyu informed them that he had been released after paying a 3 million won fine. He taunted Kung-soo, claiming that Kung-soo's efforts to put him in jail had been futile. This angered Kung-soo, and he grabbed Jin-kyu's shirt. Donna intervened and asked Jin-kyu to leave. An angry Kung-soo decided to go to the prosecutor's office. There he questioned Prosecutor Kim about why Jin-kyu was let off, with just a 3 million won fine, when there was a victim in a coma because of his actions. Prosecutor Kim dismissed Kung-soo's concerns and even ordered his arrest for entering without permission. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Mr. Jung and Sun-nae were getting frustrated because Kung-soo hadn't returned yet. They decided to fire him for neglecting his duties. But when Mr. Jung was about to start looking for a replacement, Donna suddenly intervened and pleaded for a second chance for Kung-soo. Her actions surprised Mr. Jung and Sun-nae because Donna was usually quick to dismiss employees who were no longer competent. They even asked if Donna had feelings for Kung-soo, and she reluctantly admitted that she liked him and wanted to be close to him. To make Donna happy, they decided to keep Kung-soo on the job. In the evening, the couriers were protesting in front of the prosecutor's office, demanding Kung-soo's immediate release. Prosecutor Kim, after receiving reports about Kung-soo's awards as a good citizen and fearing a public backlash, decided to release him. There was also a reporter creating news about Kung-soo's unjust arrest. After his release, Kung-soo returned to the restaurant to rest. He was surprised to find Donna still waiting for him. She asked where he had been all day, and he explained that he had been detained by the prosecutor's office for protesting Jin-kyu's release. Donna advised Kung-soo not to be too virtuous because the world had its share of evil people. On the other hand, Jin-kyu was feeling uneasy, recalling a previous incident when Mrs. Hae-run had visited him in prison and offered him a chance at freedom. However, this opportunity came with conditions. Jin-kyu had to turn her restaurant into the most successful one in the area and win Ji-yoon's heart within 6 months. If he failed, Mrs. Hae-run would kick him out. The next day, the restaurant's opening event went smoothly. Meanwhile, Kang-soo, who had visited Grandma Chong's restaurant, felt sorry because there were no customers there. Later, as Kang-soo and Donna prepared to make deliveries, Donna revealed that she had convinced Mr. Jung and Sun-nae that they had romantic feelings for each other. She had done this to prevent Kang-soo from getting fired. Kang-soo was shocked and didn't believe it at first. However, Donna asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend so that Mr. Jung and Sun-nae wouldn't suspect anything. That night, as Jin-kyu was heading towards the restaurant, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, a mysterious man suddenly attacked him with a steel pipe. But just when things seemed dire, a food delivery truck pulled up, and the mysterious man quickly ran away. It turned out that the attacker was Sung-jae, and he appeared quite frustrated for failing to harm Jin-kyu. Kang-soo, who happened to witness this encounter, approached Sung-jae and asked him about the steel pipe. Sung-jae explained that he wanted to harm Jin-kyu because he believed there was no justice left in the country. Angered by this reckless intention, Kang-soo advised Sung-jae against taking such actions. When Sung-jae left, Kang-soo picked up the steel pipe and got rid of it. After that, Kang-soo made his way to the hospital to visit Yoon-soo. Upon arriving, he noticed that Grandma Chong was still awake. He approached her and struck up a conversation. Grandma Chong shared that her business had been suffering since Jin-kyu's restaurant opened, and she was struggling to pay her hospital bills. Touched by her plight, Kang-soo was determined to assist her in any way he could. The following day, Kang-soo met with Kong-ki and his team. He asked for their assistance in handing out flyers to promote Grandma Chong's restaurant's food delivery service. Thanks to their help, Grandma Chong began making money again. Meanwhile, Jin-kyu's secretary, who had doubts about Jin-kyu's competence, suggested to Mrs. Hae-run that they should find a new manager from the management department. However, Mrs. Hae-run directed her assistant to buy the Hunbyung restaurant for 1 billion won above the market price. At another location, 2 police officers suddenly arrived at the restaurant to arrest Kang-soo. He had been caught on a security camera attacking Jin-kyu with a steel pipe. After disposing of the pipe in a certain spot, Jin-kyu entered the restaurant and confronted Kang-soo about the attack. With a smile, Kang-soo admitted to it. After the police showed Kang-soo the black box video, they told him they would keep looking for more proof. This worried Kang-soo because he didn't want Sung-jae to go to jail. So he begged the police to stop their investigation because he was the real culprit. Meanwhile, Ji-yoon, upon hearing that Kang-soo was in jail, was seen crying outside the police station. On the other hand, Kong-ki and his team thought there must be a misunderstanding. Shortly after, Sung-jae showed up and confessed his actions at the police station. But when the police asked for evidence, Sung-jae fell silent and seemed confused. This left the police frustrated because 2 people had confessed to the same crime, and both had received help from Kang-soo. The following day, they moved Kang-soo from the holding cell to the detention center. While they were waiting at a red light, Donna, who had been following them, tried to peek through the car window, as if she hoped to catch a glimpse of Kang-soo. Kang-soo felt worried seeing Donna looking so sad. Later, Donna met with Sung-jae to find out what really happened that night. Sung-jae explained that he was the one who attacked Jin-kyu, but Kang-soo had turned himself in. Meanwhile, Kang-soo started to feel guilty because he had forced Yoon-soo to meet his mother, which had resulted in Yoon-soo getting hurt. The next day, Kong-ki visited Kang-soo in jail and told her that Donna was worried about him. This surprised Kang-soo. Curious about Hunbyung restaurant's progress, Kang-soo asked Kong-ki, who reassured him that he and his team would continue to protect Hunbyung on Kang-soo's behalf and keep an eye on Yoon-soo. Meanwhile, Sung-jae returned to the restaurant without his mask to confront Jin-kyu. He demanded that Jin-kyu release Kang-soo and put him in jail instead, claiming responsibility for the previous attack. Sung-jae gave Jin-kyu 3 days to release Kang-soo, threatening to harm Jin-kyu if he didn't comply. Upon hearing Sung-jae's threat, Jin-kyu bravely stood up and challenged Sung-jae to end his life. He made it clear that he had no intention of setting Kang-soo free, feeling that they had all treated him poorly. This declaration stirred strong emotions in Sung-jae, and he prepared to strike Jin-kyu with a steel pipe. However, Grandma Chong arrived just in time and intervened. She informed them that Yoon-soo had regained consciousness and, holding Jin-kyu's hand, expressed her understanding that he didn't intend to harm anyone. Grandma Chong promised that they would no longer look down on Jin-kyu and even apologized on their behalf. The following day, deeply moved by Grandma Chong's kindness, Jin-kyu visited the prosecutor and confessed that Kung-soo had not committed any wrongdoing against him. He admitted that his emotions had gotten the best of him, and he had planned to hurt Kung-soo severely. Prosecutor Kim was visibly upset because Jin-kyu had filed a false report, and he demanded that Jin-kyu pay a fine for this offense. After this incident, Kung-soo was finally released from jail. The couriers warmly welcomed him back with great joy. To his surprise, Yoon-soo was among them, and with overflowing emotions, Kung-soo approached and hugged Yoon-soo tightly. In the evening, Donna, who couldn't stop thinking about Kung-soo, started to imagine that he was there with her. This made Donna feel sad, so she drowned her sorrows by drinking soju. However, not long after, Kung-soo unexpectedly returned to the restaurant and found Donna heavily intoxicated. Feeling sorry for her, Kung-soo decided to help and took Donna back to her home. During the journey, Donna surprised Kung-soo by suggesting that they start a romantic relationship. Kung-soo was taken aback but chose to remain silent and didn't respond. The next day, Donna screamed in shock when she realized that Kung-soo had actually brought her home, thinking it had all been a dream. Meanwhile, Grandma Chong sat alone, reading a warning letter from Mrs. Hae-run. In the letter, Mrs. Hae-run ordered her to leave the restaurant by a certain time. However, when Kung-soo arrived and handed her the letter, he boldly encouraged Grandma Chong not to be fooled by the wealthy. At the hospital, Yoon-soo's mother, who had heard that her son could come home next week, asked him to return home with her. But Yoon-soo expressed his desire to stay with the man who had become like an older brother to him. When his mother asked who this older brother was, Yoon-soo revealed that it was Kung-soo and explained where Kung-soo had come from. Hearing this, Yoon-soo's mother was shocked to discover that Kung-soo was her long-lost son. The next day, Kung-soo asked Donna to join him for a walk because he wanted to create some memories before he moved away. During their stroll, Kung-soo gave Donna a small doll charm to hang on her bag. He told her it could bring her comfort when she felt sad. In return, Donna gave Kung-soo a pair of shoes as a gesture of support for his new beginning. Before parting, Donna asked Kung-soo to take care of himself and never return to their area. Back at home, Donna sat alone, gazing at the doll Kung-soo had given her. Meanwhile, Kung-soo was in his room, looking at a childhood photo of himself with his mother. Later, as he had promised when he started working, Kung-soo left the restaurant. The following day, when Donna went to work at the restaurant, she was surprised to see Kung-soo still there. She asked him why he hadn't left as planned. Kung-soo explained that his motorcycle was being repaired at the garage because of an accident. He confessed that the accident happened because he couldn't bear to leave Donna behind and kept looking back. This revelation left Donna stunned. The next day, Yoon-soo's mother visited him at the hospital and hid when she saw Kung-soo sitting with Yoon-soo. She overheard Yoon-soo expressing his desire to stay in Seoul with Kung-soo, but Kung-soo suggested that Yoon-soo should rest with his mother, as it would be the best place for him. Afterward, Kung-soo went to the library with Donna to research starting a small business. After spending the day at the library, Kung-soo finally came up with an idea for his own business called Strong's Deliveryman, focusing solely on courier services. On the following day, Kung-soo and the other couriers, dressed in formal suits and sunglasses, visited various restaurants in the area, offering courier services for a fee of 2,000 won per delivery. Restaurant owners interested in the idea decided to collaborate with them, and Kung-soo would place a logo on their front doors as a sign of partnership. Meanwhile, at Sunnae and Mr. Jung's restaurant, they decided to let go of Donna because their restaurant had joined forces with Kung-soo's company. They'd also allowed Kung-soo to use one of their warehouses as an office and resting place. Although Donna complained about the decision, they explained that Kung-soo had offered their restaurant a 50% discount in exchange for their cooperation. Not long after, Kung-soo came to their restaurant and offered Donna a job with them. At first, Donna declined, but because she didn't have many options, she eventually agreed. The following day, Kung-soo told his employees that he wanted to create a delivery app to attract more affiliates and increase the number of customers ordering from them. To make his plan happen, he asked Wai-yong for help in developing the app. On the other hand, Donna felt jealous when she saw Kung-soo and Wai-yong getting close. Meanwhile, manager Suk met with Mrs. Hae-run to report that their sales had been gradually increasing, all thanks to Jin-kyu's hard work, resulting in a profit of 13 million won for the restaurant. However, Mrs. Hae-run wasn't satisfied because they hadn't reached their target of 20 million won in profit. The manager admitted that it would be challenging to reach that target, especially since Grandma Chong's restaurant was still in business, and they were now affiliated with Kung Su's company for courier services. On the other hand, Kung Su and Donna were getting ready to have a meal together when Kung Su got a call from Kong Ki, who told him that Grandma Chong was being forced out of her restaurant. Hearing this, Kung Su was surprised and asked Donna to join him in going to the restaurant. When they arrived, they saw Mrs. Hayrun's henchmen busy removing Grandma Chong's belongings. Kong Ki explained that Mrs. Hayrun had bought the restaurant. Thinking that Jin Q had something to do with it, Kung Su got angry and blamed Jin Q. However, Jin Q confessed that he had no knowledge of it and had just found out. Shortly after, they witnessed Grandma Chong leaving the restaurant with a sad face. Later, Jin Q went to speak with Mrs. Hayrun about the purchase of Grandma Chong's restaurant. Mrs. Hayrun explained that she had done it on purpose to help Jin Q get back the position of general manager. Jin Q, feeling disappointed, expressed that he wanted to compete based on his own abilities. On the other hand, Kung Su headed to New Myungju to meet Grandma Chong. When he arrived, he found Grandma Chong chatting with Yoon Su outside the store. Yoon Su was delighted to see Kung Su and introduced him to his mother, which surprised Kung Su as he realized that Yoon Su's mother was the one he had been searching for. The mother felt uncomfortable and tried to excuse herself, saying she wanted to buy some fruit. Seeing this, Yoon Su offered to go with his grandmother, leaving Kung Su alone with his mother. Kung Su then revealed that ever since his mother had sold their boat and house and left them, he had been trying to find her. He wanted to tell her that his father had passed away, longing for her. Even as cancer had consumed his father's body, he had always remembered and called for his mother. Before leaving, Kung Su warned his mother to always remember the reason for his father's death. When Kung Su returned to the restaurant, he went upstairs with a sad expression. Donna, concerned for him, approached him and entered his room to comfort him. Kung Su then shared that the reason he had come to Seoul for 2 months was to find his mother, but it turned out she was in New Myungju, living with Yoon Su. Hearing this, Donna was confused and didn't know what to say. Kung Su told her that she didn't need to say anything right now. Later, Kung Su expressed his gratitude to Donna for being there for him during his difficult moments. The next day, Mrs. Hayrun's secretary told her that Jin Q, their head manager, hadn't shown up at the restaurant for the transfer ceremony. Mrs. Hayrun got very angry and tried to contact Jin Q to find out where he was. However, Jin Q simply told her that he had resigned from the restaurant, hung up, and threw his phone into the river. In the evening, Jin Q, who had lost everything and hadn't eaten all day, was seen walking by the riverside, looking weak. He stumbled upon some leftover food and was about to eat it when Ji-yoon suddenly appeared and asked him not to. Instead, Ji-yoon invited Jin Q to have dinner with her. During their dinner, Ji-yoon shared that she was ready to move on from her first love, which had been a disappointment. Jin Q asked her who would help her move on and become her second love, to which Ji-yoon surprised him by saying it would be him. In the evening, Kung Su and Donna took a walk and had a heartfelt conversation. Kung Su, reminded of Donna's plan to leave Korea, expressed his wish for her to always find happiness wherever she goes. But then, he suddenly asked Donna not to go, saying he could make her happy right there. Donna couldn't hold back her tears upon hearing this. The following day, news about rent increases for several restaurant buildings emerged. Kung Su held a meeting in his office with his team and the restaurant owners. He shared that they had negotiated with the building owners to prevent the rent hike and secured a loan from a new bank with lower interest rates. However, the restaurant owners weren't pleased and continued to complain, citing their lack of customers. Kung Su suggested they compete with Restaurant Jungkook by offering lower prices and using fresh domestic ingredients. He believed that if they could survive for just 6 months, they could drive Restaurant Jungkook out of business. But the restaurant owners asked him to give up, as they couldn't even survive for 1 month. After this, the restaurant owners decided to rent out their restaurants and end their partnership with Kung Su's company. Meanwhile, at the office, employees lacked enthusiasm as there were no delivery orders coming in. Donna later met Kung Su and expressed her desire to see him succeed, encouraging him to try again so she wouldn't have to leave him. She tearfully confessed her deep love for Kung Su just the way he was. In the morning, Ji-yoon interrupted a meeting Kung Su was having with his team. She asked Kung Su to hire Jin Q in his company, believing his experience in delivery and restaurant management would be valuable. Kung Su agreed to Ji-yoon's request right away. The next day, manager Suk informed Mrs. Hayrun to sign a partnership contract the following day. Meanwhile, Min Chun told Kung Su that Young Taek and his friend had left their company and planned to work at Restaurant Jdrama because there were no more orders coming through the app. He also mentioned the need to pay their employees' salaries on time. On the other hand, Donna met with Min Chun and asked what he had discussed with Kung Soo earlier. Min Chun informed her that there would be no money left after this month. Worried about the company's financial situation, Donna decided to help by investing her own money. However, when Kung Soo overheard their conversation by chance, he immediately refused because he didn't want to touch Donna's hard-earned savings. In the evening, Donna informed Kung Soo that her friends had invested 300 million won in their company, which surprised him. During a meeting with Kung Soo and his team, Yoon Soo suddenly arrived, drunk, and revealed that he was Kung Soo's younger brother. He then collapsed. While carrying Yoon Soo to a room, Kung Soo started to think that their mother had told Yoon Soo the truth about their family. Soon after, their mother arrived to take Yoon Soo back, but Kung Soo refused, believing that their mother had caused Yoon Soo to suffer, just like she had done to him and their father. With anger in his eyes, Kung Soo pressed their mother to explain why she had left them. Their mother revealed that she had been forced to marry their father to pay off her debts and had planned to leave him once she had the money. However, because Kung Soo's father was a good person, she found it hard to leave him. Eventually, when debt collectors returned, their mother left them and ran away on her own. Hearing this, Kung Soo ran out of the restaurant to release his emotions by crying intensely. The following day, Kung Soo saw that Yoon Soo had just woken up and advised him not to drink too much. They shared a hug, and then Kong Ki arrived to tell them that Restaurant Jdrama had gone bankrupt. They felt extremely happy for defeating Mrs. A Run. Sometime later, Ji Yoon, who was now a kindergarten teacher, was seen walking one of her students home. Jin Kyu arrived to pick her up. Meanwhile, Grandma Chong finally reopened her restaurant, which had been taken over for a while. On the other hand, Kung Soo's relationship with his mother continued to improve as he decided to reconcile with her. Later, in front of the campus, 3 students asked Donna about the type of man she liked, and she pointed to Kung Soo, who was waiting for her next to his motorcycle. Moral lesson from the story: life is like a box of delivery pizza. You might not always get what you ordered, but sometimes you end up with the cheesiest surprise.